The rain had just finished washing the streets of Quiapo, leaving behind puddles that reflected flickering streetlights like broken mirrors. Vendors were packing their carts, jeepneys coughed smoke as they crawled past, and the night smelled of damp concrete and old prayers. It was on this restless street that Marco Villanueva walked with the swagger of a man who believed fear was for others. His laughter was loud, sharp, and careless, the kind that dared the world to challenge him. People noticed him not because he was important, but because trouble always seemed to walk beside him like a shadow. At the corner near the old church, Police Officer Elias Ramos stood on duty, calm and upright, his uniform neat despite the long shift. He was known in the area not for brutality, but for firmness, the kind that did not bend to insults or threats. When Marco brushed past a group of pedestrians and nearly knocked over an elderly woman, Elias stepped forward and asked him to slow down. Marco sneered, his words cutting deep as he mocked the officer's authority, his job, and even his family. The street went quiet, as if the night itself had stopped breathing, because everyone knew that words once thrown could never be taken back. Marco's insults echoed louder in his own ears than in the street, feeding a pride that had grown wild and uncontrollable. He believed uniforms were costumes and rules were jokes made for weaker men. As he walked away, still laughing, he felt powerful, convinced that nothing would happen because nothing ever had before. The city, in his mind, was a playground, and he was untouchable. He did not see the way people watched him go with pity mixed with fear, or how some crossed themselves as if danger had just passed. Officer Elias remained still, his face unreadable, but inside him something hardened like cooling steel. He had learned long ago that respect was not demanded with fists, but earned through patience and discipline. Still, he also knew that insults carried weight, and careless actions often returned like boomerangs. As he resumed his patrol, the rainwater soaking into his boots, he whispered a quiet prayer, not for revenge, but for strength, because the night had a way of testing men when they least expected it. Days passed, and Marco continued his life of loud nights and reckless choices, unaware that his name had begun to circulate quietly among officers, not as a target, but as a warning sign. Trouble followed him more closely now, appearing in small, unsettling ways. His motorcycle broke down in empty streets, strange figures seemed to linger behind him, and his sleep became shallow, haunted by dreams of sirens and footsteps echoing endlessly behind him. Meanwhile, Officer Elias found himself assigned to a new operation targeting illegal dealings in the same neighborhoods Marco frequented. Fate, it seemed, was weaving their paths together with careful hands. Elias studied reports late into the night, his eyes heavy but focused, sensing that the man who mocked him was more deeply tangled in darkness than he had realized. The conflict was no longer about pride or insults, it was about choices, consequences, and the thin line between order and chaos. The barrio prepared for a local festival, colorful banners stretching across streets, music filling the air with false cheer. Masks were worn not just for celebration, but to hide intentions, and Marco loved it. Surrounded by noise and alcohol, he felt invisible, free to boast and mock anyone who crossed his path. Under the flashing lights, he retold the story of how he insulted a police officer and walked away untouched, each retelling more exaggerated than the last. What Marco did not know was that Officer Elias was also present, not in uniform, blending into the crowd like a silent observer. He watched Marco's movements, his interactions, the way people around him tensed. Elias felt the weight of responsibility settle heavier on his chest as he realized this was not just a loud man with a bad mouth, but someone capable of pulling others into danger. The festival drums beat faster, mirroring the rising tension neither man could escape. As the night deepened, a fight broke out near the edge of the celebration, bottles shattering and people screaming. Marco found himself in the center of it, his laughter turning sharp and brittle as fear crept in. Police sirens wailed in the distance, cutting through the music like knives. For the first time, Marco felt the ground beneath him shift, the illusion of control slipping away. Officer Elias moved swiftly, coordinating with his team, his voice calm amid the chaos. When he finally came face to face with Marco again, there was no anger in his eyes, only resolve. Marco recognized him instantly, and the memory of his insults returned like a slap. The crowd watched as Marco's bravado crumbled, replaced by something raw and desperate, while Officer Elias stood firm, the law made human before him. Hands were raised, cuffs clicked shut, and the noise of the festival faded into a distant hum. Marco struggled, shouting protests and insults, but they rang hollow now. Each word only tightened the grip of reality around him. The streets he once ruled felt suddenly narrow, closing in as he was led away under flashing lights. Officer Elias felt no triumph, but only a heavy sadness. He had seen this story before, different faces, same ending. As Marco was placed in the patrol car, their eyes met once more, and in that moment Marco understood that the uniform he mocked represented more than authority. It represented consequence. The ride to the station was silent, filled with thoughts Marco could no longer outrun.
The holding cell was cold, its concrete walls stained with the echoes of past regrets. Marco sat alone, his mind racing, replaying his choices like a broken film reel. The laughter, the insults, the confidence, all felt distant now. Time moved differently inside those walls, stretching each second into something heavy and suffocating. Officer Elias completed his reports with steady hands, though his heart felt burdened. He knew that punishment alone rarely changed a man. Still, the law had to stand, or the streets would fall into darkness. As he locked the files away, he wondered whether Marco would learn, or whether pride would continue to blind him even here. Inside the station, older officers shared quiet stories, folk tales of sorts, about men who believed themselves above the law and how life humbled them. Marco overheard fragments through the bars, tales of downfall and redemption, of warnings ignored. Each story struck him deeper than any insult ever could. Elias listened too, remembering his own mentor, who taught him that respect was a seed planted early or learned painfully later. He watched Marco through the glass, seeing not just a criminal, but a man standing at a crossroads. The suspense lay not in what punishment would come, but in whether Marco would change before it was too late. Night stretched endlessly, shadows crawling along the station walls. Marco barely slept, jolted awake by every sound. Fear, unfamiliar and unwelcome, settled into his bones. He thought of his family, the people he mocked, the officer he insulted, and for the first time, shame outweighed anger. Officer Elias remained on duty, the silence giving him space to reflect. He believed deeply in justice, but also in mercy earned through understanding. As dawn crept closer, he prepared himself for the next step, not just as an officer, but as a man tasked with guiding order back into a fractured life. In the morning, Elias spoke to Marco calmly, without threats or raised voice. He explained the charges, the process, and the possible outcomes, each word measured and firm. Marco listened, truly listened, his defenses worn thin by the night. There were no insults now, only nods and quiet breaths. The power in that moment did not come from authority, but from restraint. Marco realized that the officer he insulted had every chance to crush him with anger, but chose discipline instead. That realization burned deeper than fear, planting a seed of regret he could not ignore. News of Marco's arrest spread quickly, whispered in markets and discussed in tricycles. Some mocked him, others pitied him, but all agreed that the streets had spoken. Respect, once broken, was hard to repair. Marco faced his consequences not just in court, but in the eyes of the community he once terrorized with arrogance. Officer Elias returned to patrol, greeted with nods of approval and quiet gratitude. He carried himself the same as always, knowing that today it was Marco, tomorrow someone else. The cycle never truly ended, but each stand mattered, each insult answered not with rage, but with resolution. Months later, Marco walked those same streets again, quieter now, eyes lowered, steps careful. The city had not changed, but he had. The memory of that night, the officer, the cell, and the silence stayed with him like a scar that reminded him where pride could lead. And in the stories told by vendors and elders, a new folktale grew, a warning passed from mouth to mouth. It spoke of a man who insulted a Filipino police officer and learned the hard way that authority backed by discipline is not easily mocked. The lesson echoed through the streets. Disrespect the law, and the law will deal with you, not in anger, but in truth.